Welcome to the Your Next Move podcast with Kimberly Brown. We have another career Q&A episode today where I'm answering your deepest career and leadership development questions. If you have questions and that weren't answered today, please email me at podcast@manifestyourself.com. Let's get into it.
Why do we stop doing what we love in order to move up? How can you grow in your career without moving into a manager role?
So in many times in our careers, we may feel like in order to move up in the organization, we have to become a manager. And sometimes that can feel like you're giving up what you're doing every single day or a large piece of it to manage other people. And that may be the case in some industries. In my book, Next Move, Best Move, Transitioning into a Career You'll Love, the first chapter in the book is serving as a people leader is not a rite of passage, it's a privilege. So if you really and truly feel like you do not want to manage people, I encourage you not to, because it's not going to be a great fit. And honestly, it's not even going to be a good experience for the people on your team. Now, in some industries, this may be very hard. It may be really hard to find a role where you don't have to manage a team. So I encourage you to have very candid conversations with your network, with potential companies, to really understand what type of opportunities are there for you? How can you continue to be an individual contributor? And I completely understand it may be a little hard. Another way to think about this is if you move into a role where you have to be a manager, see if you're able to put a buffer in between you and larger team. There's a difference between managing one person who then manages a whole bunch of other people, or you with 8, 9, 10 plus direct reports. See how you can mitigate that risk while still moving your career forward. But I totally understand. And I also want to commend you for understanding and articulating that you don't want to manage people. Because there's nothing worse than a manager who does not like managing people. So have some really candid conversations with your network and see if there are any organizations, if there are any jobs or roles available where you don't have to manage people. And if you have to, it is a very small group and you can have a bit of a buffer in between you and a much larger team.
How do hiring managers feel about career breaks?
So career breaks are an interesting topic, right? So sometimes career breaks are for a parent who's gone away from having a child. It could be for taking care of a loved one. It could be for your own mental health. It could be from a layoff. So again, I believe it's really about storytelling. Some managers are really hung up on taking that break, where others really aren't. It's about making sure you're able to curate a statement. So when I work with my clients one-on-one and we're talking about potential career breaks or in the Next Move, Best Move community, one of the things that we work on is creating a 1 to 2 sentence reply to address the career break. Because sometimes we could have so much anxiety in an interview about answering that question, and then we fumble and we start talking about all these other things that aren't related. I want you to think about a 1 to 2 sentence statement that talks about that experience, and also feel like you don't necessarily have to go into it. You don't need to tell someone about a sick parent or a child. Talk about what you feel comfortable and re-put it back into you being excited to re-enter the workforce at this job and articulating how your experience directly relates to the job that you're applying for. You don't have to get into the nitty-gritty.
Thank you. How do I get noticed for a job when I have 15 years of experience in another country?
Got it. So again, we have a lot of questions on this podcast about making career transitions when you are in a different field, when your experience comes from a different country. And again, my personal opinion is that it's all about positioning. Yes, things may be different when you're applying for jobs and you've been outside of the US and you're now applying in the US, or vice versa. However, it's about that storytelling. It's how are you relating your past experience to the experience that you're going to have, and making it crystal clear. It is no one's responsibility but yours to relate your experience to that job. It is not the recruiter's job or the manager to decipher what you were doing and put it into layman's terms for the job that you're applying to. I talk about this also with veterans. Many times when someone's explaining their military experience to a civilian, it may not make sense. We may not understand exactly what they're doing. The same thing when you've worked internationally and you're coming to the US, it probably won't be as big of a transition when we're talking about military experience to civilian experience. But make sure you're telling that story. What are you qualified to do based upon your experience? And also understanding, are there any norms of how things transition when coming into a role in a different country? What does that look like to make sure you can speak to those nuances and not expect the manager or recruiter to do it for you?
Thank you. What are the best ways to communicate the need for a stretch opportunity?
I love that. So if you're not familiar with a stretch opportunity, this means you're in your current role, most likely want to transition into a higher level role, but you know there's a gap. So you want a stretch opportunity, literally stretching you to prepare you for the next role. So you're looking for a project, a special connection to someone on another team, but literally looking for something to help bridge that gap. Again, I really believe that professionals should be having career conversations with their manager at least quarterly. So these conversations are literally just about your career. And this should be a conversation that you're having. When you're preparing for a promotion, I highly recommend letting your manager know, I see this gap that I'm not able to fulfill in my current job. Are there any stretch opportunities or assignments that I can work on that will prepare me for this next move in my career? Or you can ask, what do you need to see from me in order to know I'm ready for that next job? And generally, they'll start to talk about different things. And you could say, you know, I really feel like a stretch opportunity or a stretch assignment would be a great way for me to bridge this gap, and have some suggestions. As a manager, I always tell my people, please bring to me problems and solutions. Don't just bring problems. Even if it's just an idea that you want to articulate and how things could be different, how things could work, make sure you come to the table with an idea on what that looks like. What is the type of stretch opportunity that you want? Don't just wait for your manager to cultivate it and bring it for you and present it to you. You may have an idea of what that looks like. How can you present that to your manager when you're asking for it? So it makes it super easy for them to bring you into that stretch opportunity. The last piece I'll say on that is make sure you are performing well at your current job. Now, we may think this is a given, but I have to say it anyways. If you are not managing your current body of work, many managers will not give you more work in this stretch opportunity. So you need to be performing well over here in this job before you add on something else. And if your manager is concerned about how you're splitting your time, make sure you're able to talk about that as well. Some companies allow people to spend 20% time in another role in a stretch project. Other companies is not as formal. So again, make sure you've got this handled here before you try and add on something else.
Perfect, thank you. How do you create boundaries as a manager while still being transparent?
Okay, so as a manager, yes, it's one of the most exciting things to move into. However, when you're moving from your peers to being a manager, one of the things you have to do is really create boundaries. Now, sometimes it can feel like you're leaving one lunch table and moving to the next and acting like you don't know those people. We don't want that to happen. However, as a manager, sometimes you are privy to information that can't be trickled down to the entire team. So I recommend setting clear expectations with your team and with your peers about what can be shared and what cannot be shared. Transparency is something that is so big in organizations. And I've even heard companies say that they value radical transparency. But I'll encourage you, even in radical transparency, sometimes the transparent thing to say is, I'm not able to share this at this time. But as soon as I am, I will bring you up to speed so that we all know what our next steps are going to be. So when you're thinking about boundaries, sometimes it could be information that you have. Sometimes it could be relationships that you have. Personally, I've moved into management level roles and went to a role when I had peers, and I was now at a more senior level role. And I know in the office, I wanted to make sure that I was positioning myself for higher level movement. One of my mentors always told me that when you want to move in the workplace, you can't be having water cooler conversations. Now, this may sound a little harsh, but I'm going to say it anyways. This is my podcast. I'm going to say it anyways. So if you want to move, you can't be having water cooler conversations. You need to be having conversations with where you're going, not where you are. So when you move into these higher level roles, it's also time for you to bring up your relationships. speaking to your new peers, and creating some boundaries. It's not to say that you can't be friends with people anymore. It's not to say that you can't be friendly, but I want you to also think about where you're going. And don't be afraid to set relationship boundaries, conversation boundaries, information boundaries. I also recommend a book by Nedra called Setting Boundaries. I think it's Setting Boundaries, Finding Peace. And I think it's phenomenal at talking about how to articulate and set proper boundaries.
That is the last question.
Well, with that, y'all, I appreciate all of your questions. If you have questions that were not answered today, I invite you to email me at podcast@manifestyourself.com, and I look forward to seeing you soon. And may your next move be your very best move. Thank you so much for tuning in this week to the Your Next Move podcast. Don't forget to share this episode with a colleague or friend so we can all level up together. If you enjoyed today's episode, please write a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And lastly, if you're looking to join a community of thriving professionals, I invite you to join the Next Move Best Move community, my private community of professionals that includes the Manifest Yourself signature leadership development courses, monthly lunch and learns, and more. For more information, please go to kimberlybeonline.com/community. Until next week, remember to make your next move your very best move.